Okay, so welcome everyone to tonight's seminar with the BACP on the EDI strategy on their journey so far. It's going to be quite the origin story, I think. And who doesn't love an origin story? So just to make everybody aware that this is being recorded just this hour, so that you're all aware that that's happening. I think that's important. And I hope everyone's doing all right. So just very quickly, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Emily, and I currently work as a full-time person-centered counsellor in a GP setting, and I have a massive interest in the therapy and social change network and all of the work that we try and do together as a community. I'd like to also note that I am working class, female, white, and I am talking from a place of privilege, which I think is important to put out there. The other thing I'd like to put out there for today as well is that I'd like to keep this space as an opportunity for curious exploration. It might not be as interactive. At times, we are going to have the lovely people from the BACP present, and then after they've presented, we'll open the chat so that we can keep questions till the end, much like as if we were in person and someone was doing it, where you would keep the questions till the end. And I'd like obviously us all to remember that we are all human. We're all coming from different places, a lot of intersectionality going on. But just to remember that this can be scary for everyone. We're all a bit vulnerable when we're in these spaces together. And so you've got to keep yourself safe too. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that after the EDI strategy update from the BACP, we'll also be having our half an hour at the end. So please stick around if you want to kind of talk about more things towards the end. That's great. And we'll also be following this up roughly about 6 weeks' time, around about the 31st of May, as a feedback on what you've maybe thought about tonight. And it's been offered that we're very welcome to send our feedback to the members that are here with us tonight as well. So that's quite exciting. So we'll get straight on, because I know they've got quite a lot to get through in the very short 45 minutes. But today we are joined by Bryony Harper, who is from the BACP's EDI Task and Finish group. We've got Jeremy Bacon, who is the BACP Third Sector Policy Lead, and Carolyn Jespers, who is the BACP Head of Professional Standards. And they're all here to tell us what's been going on with their journey so far. So I'll hand over to you guys if you're ready.
That's great, Emily. Thank you very much for that welcome and that introduction. And it is absolutely brilliant to be here, to accept your invitation to come and speak to the network today. And we are going to tell you about BACP's journey so far in developing our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. I am Jeremy Bacon and I work in the BACP policy team in my role as third sector lead. And as Emily says, I'm joined this afternoon by Carolyn Jesper, who is Head of Professional Standards, and Bryony Harper, who is a BACP member, who was one of the members who was part of our Task and Finish group in the development of the strategy. So we have got a lot to get through. We hope that there'll be time for feedback, comment and questions. And we're really grateful to everybody for taking the time to join us today. We regret that Steve Rattray, who I think was advertised as being part of our event, we hope to involve him, but unfortunately, Steve wasn't able to make it today. So just in terms of our work on our EDI strategy, we thought we would just sort of structure this past, present and future. So we'll give you a little bit of background as to where the strategy has come from, why we've done it, how we've gone about it, a bit on the present, the kind of projects that we're working on and how the strategy is influencing BACP's work, and then a little look to the future. We've got some projects in the pipeline, but we're also really interested in hearing from you, activities maybe that you're involved in, or any suggestions and ideas that might support the further rollout of our strategy. So just by way of background, the strategy was launched and shared with our members through comms and in Therapy Today early in 2023, so last year. And it's been underpinned by a financial commitment from the BACP board of £1.3 million. So that's to fund the development of the strategy, but also key projects within the strategy. So the approach we took in developing the strategy has been very much rooted in ideas of social justice and social change, and with the key drivers really of working to better understand, to recognize, and to take action on the barriers, removing the barriers that prevent people either from accessing counselling, and also those barriers that prevent people from entering and progressing within the counselling professions. As we go through some of the projects and some of the objectives today, we hope that that'll become apparent. And I think I wanted also just to say that whilst the scope of the strategy is far-reaching and recognises the need for change across many areas, there has been an early priority focus on racial inequalities that impact the counselling profession and access to therapy. And for my part within the policy team, I was involved with our then president, David Weaver. Just before the strategy was launched, we prepared a policy paper called Race for the Soul of the Profession, sets out the case for action to address racial inequalities with relation to counselling. The paper includes the long-standing evidence of the poor experience of Black people accessing mental health support and the need for culturally informed, culturally insensitive therapy. So in giving you this update, we're actually really keen to emphasize that the work is ongoing. We're not here to tell you that it's done. It's not done. It's far from done. There's an enormous amount of work still to do, but every journey starts with the first step, and these are our first steps that we're sharing with you today. And I think we also want to try and convey to you that as well as the projects that have been funded through the designated funds to deliver on the strategy, the development of the strategy, the work that's gone into it, has really started to shape thinking within BACP, and there's not really any areas of work that we do now where we're not taking an EDI lens in helping us to develop it. So the strategy, as I said, was developed collaboratively with a task and finish group of BACP members. There were 6 BACP members in all, and Bryony Harper was one of those. So I'm going to hand over to Bryony now, and she's going to talk to you a bit about the rationale, the scope of the strategy, her role in its development, and some reflections in being involved in that development. Over to you, Bryony.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the rationale and scope of the strategy, and I thought that the best way to do this would be to pick out some of the key information from within the strategy. So starting off with the vision section, which is at the start of the strategy, this part outlines BACP's commitment to improving equality, diversity and inclusion, and BACP's vision for the future, which, to summarise, the vision is to embed change that ensures the relevance of counselling professions within a diverse society, to remove and address barriers to training, entry to counselling professions and access to paid employment, to remove barriers that prevent the growth and evolution of therapists, and to ensure that members experience an inclusive organisation that reflects their values. And within this vision as well, it's noted that social justice is at the heart of the strategy, and for BACP, that is about ensuring that anyone who needs counselling is able to access equitable, ethical and effective practice as well. Next slide, please. And another key area that I think from the strategy is really relevant in thinking about outlining the rationale and the scope of the strategy is this section. So why are equality, diversity and inclusion so important to BACP? And in this part, it outlines the ethical case, the legal case, and the business case for equality, diversity and inclusion. And this is both from the perspective of the internal business case for BACP as an organisation and the business case for BACP members and BACP members' clients as well. And the strategy then goes on to outline the 6 strategic goals with each accompanying tactical step, which we'll be looking at in a little bit more detail on the next slides. But each tactical step is then outlined in detail, and there is a description of each step, including the relevant context for that step, a discussion of BACP's commitments in relation to each step, and discussions of the impact of each step. So what BACP wants to achieve by including that step. So there are 6 steps in total. Next slide, thank you. So strategic goal 1 is that BACP will listen to, learn from and work with members to inform the work of the association, that they'll recognise the tactical step to go with that is that they will recognise and work to remove barriers that prevent marginalised voices from participating in member consultations, and will ensure that all members feel listened to and engaged with. The second strategic goal is for BACP to equip members to be able to work in a fast-changing world and to be able to influence and contribute to the well-being of society. And the tactical step that goes along with that is to promote learning and development opportunities on EDI to support members to work with the communities that we serve. The third strategic goal is for BACP to be the professional home of choice for members and communities of practice, providing relevant services and opportunities to learn and develop and inspire each other. And the tactical step that goes with that is for BACP to take an active stance on issues of EDI in member services and communications, working with members to create a professional home where members feel they belong. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the fourth strategic goal is for BACP to further develop confidence in and credibility of the profession by developing and upholding professional and ethical standards informed by an evidence base. And the tactical step to go along with that is for BACP to ensure that EDI awareness and understanding are embedded into training and practice standards. The fifth strategic goal is for BACP to campaign for the appropriate provision of counselling and psychotherapy for all members of society and for opportunities for paid employment for BACP members, championing the skills, competence and contribution of BACP members to the public, to employers, to commissioners and to policymakers. And the tactical step that goes with strategic goal 5 is for BACP to campaign and advocate for equality of access to counselling and psychotherapy. And the final strategic goal, goal 6, is for BACP to optimise the organisation of BACP to ensure it's flexible, responsive and capable of resourcing the vision and goals. And they'll do that by continuing to create an inclusive workplace which respects and values diversity, equality and inclusivity. So those are brief overviews of the 6 goals. They are sort of outlined in much more detail and depth throughout the kind of main sections of the EDI strategy, but just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of what the 6 key strategic goals were. Next slide, please. So thinking about the development of the strategy then, and this part is very much kind of based on my experience as a member of the Task and Finish group. And as Jeremy said, the members of the Task and Finish group, we were members of the BACP. So I responded to an advert that I saw in Therapy Today and then interviewed to be a member of the Task and Finish group in around February 2021. Then from April 2021, I attended the Task and Finish group meetings, and those were from April until August 2022. So it was quite a long piece of work, really, and it did take perhaps longer than I think we initially thought it would. Things were sort of extended slightly, but I think that's because we really wanted to make sure that we covered everything and, that we'd kind of thought about things as much as possible. It just became clear that we really needed to think about this, really carefully and be really clear on what we wanted this strategy to do. Alongside those meetings, I was also part of a panel for a listening workshop, one of BACP's listening workshops, ensuring a diverse, inclusive and equitable culture for all. And that was a workshop where members were able to ask questions, and we gave some answers to questions that were asked in advance and during as well. And from that, really got a sense of the really sort of diverse opinions, I suppose, obviously, thinking about the diverse membership that we serve and the diverse communities that our members serve as well. So a real kind of diversity of questions and opinions there, and that all really went back into those Task and Finish group meetings and informed a lot of our thinking around the sorts of things that we were doing and including within the strategy after that listening panel. Then, so had the meetings, had the panel, had some more meetings, then finally had a first draft, sent this to some people for feedback. There were sort of focus groups and things like that, I think, for feedback. And once we had that feedback, started to make some revisions, finalised the draft and made those revisions in August 2022, before the EDI strategy was finally sort of dotting the I's, cross the T's, signed off by the people who sign it off, and ready and launched in March 2023. So that was the process of the development of the strategy from my perspective as a task and finish group member. I'm sure there were plenty of other things happening all the time in the background with BACP staff, but those were the kind of key things where I was involved as a task and finish group member. Next slide, please. Okay, so finally then, just some reflections on the process. So this is just for me personally, as a member of BACP and a member of that task and finish group as well. So I think when I look back on that experience, when I think about the start of it, I really put myself forward quite tentatively, maybe a slight bit of imposter syndrome. It was something I was really interested in and passionate about, but was kind of, I don't know, worried that I maybe wasn't influential enough, but was really encouraged to go for it right from the start. So really kind of encouraged to put myself forward by BACP staff that I've reached out to speak to about the opportunity. And it was really clear from the start that it was my perspective as a BACP member that was really valued and that was really, of value within the task and finish group. There was a real kind of diversity and passion within the group. Different perspectives came with that diversity and passion, and they were all balanced really respectfully. And I really valued hearing about the other perspectives of the other members of the group, and I really valued getting to know them as well, the other members of the group. And throughout as well, I was really struck by the fact that there was a clear commitment to having this as an active strategy. So it not being a stale document, a kind of tick the box, BACP's done the equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, we'll stick it on the shelf, not worry about it anymore. It's really going to be an active, evolving document. And that was always very clear in our sort of thoughts and decisions about what was happening within the strategy. So that was kind of one of the key things that really struck me and strikes me still when I look back on the process. And I feel like I really got as much out of the process as I put into it as well, which I wasn't really expecting. I do feel that the value in me as a member and my perspectives as a member, and getting to know and build relationships with the other members of the task and finish group, I really feel like I got a lot out of being involved in this process, as much as I was able to put into it as well. And it really took the passion that I had around equality, diversity and inclusion, and really increased my passion for social justice, particularly in counselling. So I'm really excited to be here today and speaking to you all, because I think being involved in this process really kind of took me from that kind of that passion about equality, diversity and inclusion, and recognising how that kind of maps onto social justice work in counselling as well. So those are my reflections as a task and finish group member. So that's me kind of reminiscing about the past. We're going to move on now and talk about the present.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Bryony. And yeah, just to say, I mean, that task and finish, it's really good to hear your reflections on that. I was fortunate enough to be part of that task and finish group from the staff perspective, and I know the amount of hard work that went into it, the conversations, sometimes difficult conversations, because I think these things need difficult conversations at times. But it's fantastic to see you again, to hear those reflections. So we're going to move on to talk to you a little bit, give you some examples of the work that has come out of the strategy. So Bryony's given you that overview. There's the 6 tactical steps. The strategy, by the way, is available on the BACP website if anybody wants to have a look at it. If you just go to the homepage and type into the search EDI strategy, it'll come up. There's also the other thing that'll probably come up. There's a landing page of EDI resources, which is kind of pulls together different areas of CPD, articles, links to policy papers, that kind of thing. So if people want to have a look at that afterwards, or we can share that link. So I just wanted to go through, this is the part of the presentation becomes a bit of a list. So I'll apologize in advance for that. And I'll probably be able to speak more about the work that I've been directly involved in. But I wanted to just run through, give you a sense and a flavor of some of the projects that have been started. Some are completed and some are still ongoing in support of the development of the EDI strategy. So we've spoken already about the strategy development and launch. That was a key part of what the board wanted to see as part of this. Very early on, in fact, I think it was while the strategy was still being developed, one of the first things that we did as an organization was have a look at what how accessible our outward facing documents, communications, forms, and interaction with members was. So to carry out that, we brought in an external consultant who conducted an extensive review, accessibility review of BACP's member-facing documentation right across the whole organization. And when that work was completed, they were able to give us a list of recommendations that has gone on to form an implementation plan. So many of those changes have been made, but there's still work being done. But what it has given us as well is a better understanding of what we need to be doing when we're developing new products and new documents, to make sure that rather than change things to make them accessible, we're making them accessible from the start. The next couple of projects were 2 pilot projects which have focused on entry and progression into the counselling professions for students from racialized community backgrounds. 2 projects, one was mentoring and the other was student bursary schemes. So the mentoring pilot scheme was set up in response to student members, the experience of student members from marginalized community backgrounds who found training courses often challenging. In fact, we had somebody on the Task and Finish group who spoke to us about his experience of being the only Black trainee on his course, and just how, without it meaning to be and without it being, it's just systemically he felt that he was marginalized within that context. So the aim of the mentoring scheme really was to better support trainee counsellors and psychotherapists on practitioner training courses. And the scheme offered professional support and encouragement through the mentoring. So there were 20 pairs recruited, so 20 mentors and 20 mentees, and they worked together. They had a minimum of 6 sessions per pair, and that was completed over a 9-month period. So the pilot scheme was completed last year, and its evaluation will shape the future design and launch of the next wave of mentoring pairs and scheme. I mentioned that we have the EDI landing page on the website. So again, I can maybe share the link in the chat later on, or if people again just put EDI into the search on the BACP homepage, it'll take you to our page of EDI resources. One of those resources which I was involved in was a podcast, anti-racism podcast. We worked with Hackney Borough Council to produce a series of discussions, series of podcasts that focused on racism, racial trauma, anti-racism and white allyship in tackling racism. So there are 5 episodes that are on the website. Again, I would encourage people to give those a listen. It does, of course, come with a warning that conversations included in those podcasts include focus on the hurt and pain caused by racism. So just a sort of word of warning with that. And just on the topic of podcasts, the mentoring scheme, there's been a podcast produced, hasn't been shared yet, but will soon go on to the BACP Learning Centre. And it's a podcast which is a discussion between a mentor and a mentee. It's called From Catering to Counselling, and it follows one mentee's journey from changing career to get into the counselling professions. I also just forgot to mention student bursaries. So obviously another barrier to entry into the profession that we know about is the cost of training and the barrier that presents for many people. So I announced at our 2022 AGM was a pilot bursary scheme which provided financial support to students from marginalized and racialized community backgrounds. So in the pilot, 10 bursaries were awarded, 5 to students at entry level and 5 to students who were at progression level. So there's going to be shortly, we're going to be sharing on the website a story of one of those student bursary recipients. And again, this is another project that, whilst funded through the through the designated funds. Very much a pilot and very much being done to capture that knowledge and learning from these things so that we can inform future similar delivery. I mentioned the podcasts. Similar to that, we co-sponsored an event held in Reading last year called Black Men on the Couch, and that's part of an initiative that's been set up by Restore, Counselling and Clarity Works, which founded this Black Men on the Couch series. And the event really just gave a platform for Black men to share their stories, highlighting the importance of Black men's mental health, but also crucially, the barriers and stigma that can prevent help seeking. And I think encouraging these discussions, generate the discussions are really important. I think that I mentioned earlier on, it's about increasing our understanding and recognition. So, you know, an important event for us to have been involved in. The next thing I want to talk about is one that I've been directly involved in, which is our third sector grant scheme. BACP, apart from our sort of research grants, we're not really a grant making organization, but within these designated funds allocated by the board, we have piloted a grant scheme. So we made it an open competition for BACP organizational members to submit project proposals for projects that would help to remove barriers to therapy for clients from marginalized and racialized community backgrounds. We received some cracking applications for that, and we funded 2 projects. We initially set out to fund 1 project, but we couldn't separate the 2 that we wanted to fund, so we ended up finding additional funding to bring 2 pilots in. So we funded an organization up in Newcastle called Children Northeast, who to help them to make their counselling service more accessible to children and young people from refugee and asylum seeking backgrounds, which hadn't previously been the case. As a result of the project, they've now reported that they're actually on the hub, the wellbeing hub, so that when services are being sought for young people from those backgrounds, they now come up as a service that can better meet those needs. The second project we funded was the Metanoia Institute, to help them to develop avatar-assisted therapy for autistic people from racialized community backgrounds. And the thing just to say about both of these, we set the criteria for both organizations to work with community-based partners. It was about co-production with experts in the field. So we're using those, we had those projects externally evaluated, and I'll talk a little bit more about our next step with that when we come to the bit around the future. And the final thing for me before I hand over to Caroline is just to tell you about our work with the Diversity and Inclusion Coalition. And one of the outputs from that has been the Race is Complicated toolkit and training event. So produced by, co-authored by Danielle Osajevibi-Williams and Marceline Meunier. The toolkit is really aimed at training providers, and it provides information around racism and anti-oppressive practice. It's free to download on the BACP website. The link is on the slide there, and we'll also share that afterwards. And we had the authors of the toolkit at our accredited courses and services event, which was held in London this Wednesday. So I will pass on to Caroline now to talk through some of the present work that relates more closely to standards and that area of our work. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. So again, another bit.
Caroline, I think you've gone on mute.
Oh, sorry. Don't know what
Caroline, that's my fault. I went to mute myself and I muted you instead. Sorry.
You're just trying to sabotage me.
Like you're not psychodynamic therapist here.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, unfortunately, this is going to be another bit of a list, but it's just to give you a bit of an overview of some of the work that has taken place and is going on at the moment in professional standards at BACP. So the first thing is that we started in 2021 an EDI review of both our course and service accreditation schemes. So we commissioned Dr. Dwight Turner to undertake an EDI review of the current course scheme. And as part of that process, we convened 2 focus groups, one with students and the other one with staff from accredited courses. and also an expert peer review panel. So Dwight kindly produced a report as a result of those activities with some findings and a number of recommendations which have helped to inform the next stages of our review. So we are taking a developmental approach to this process. So following on from Dwight's reports, we actually carried out a survey with our courses around EDI to better understand how they're already embedding EDI into all aspects of the training, and to identify what the gaps might be and what support they might need to be able to improve. And we've now got an accreditation development lead, Tanya McClymont-Achukwu, and she's been analysing all of this information and developing the criteria for the course scheme, which we hope to implement sometime next year once we've got BACP's Board of Governors approval. And we're taking a similar approach when we're reviewing the service accreditation scheme as well. We've undertaken quite an in-depth review of the good practice in action resources. So following on from the consultants review a couple of years ago, we've implemented some of the recommendations that were made, and we've also made quite a few changes to the resources, making them more accessible to members. And we do have a member group called the Good Practice Steering Group, who've also been reviewing the suite of good practice resources through an EDI lens, and they've identified some new resources, and we've started commissioning authors to develop some of those. The ethical framework review, and we're actively taking steps to ensure that EDI is embedded into the review of the ethical framework. And we've got EDI specialists and members with lived experience on the project team, because we want to ensure that the ethical framework is both accessible to our members and also embeds EDI. So it gives the right support to our members who are working with diverse client groups and in diverse contexts. Next on the list, so the NHS Core Training Pathway pilot. Some of you might already be aware of this. So in 2021, NHS England announced the launch of a landmark 3-year pilot programme to provide fully funded training for psychotherapeutic counselling within IAP services. So 3 courses began in September 22, delivering postgraduate level training in the IAPT, what was IAPT modalities. So person-centred experiential counselling for depression, dynamic interpersonal therapy, and couples therapy for depression. And they're being delivered at Metanoia, University of Roehampton and Tavistock, respectively. And the really good thing about this is that the trainees are actually paid while they undertake their training. So they do their placement hours in their local NHS talking therapist service, and they're paid as they do that, and the course is fully funded. And it's been jointly accredited by 5 of the 6 scope partners, BACP included, and UKCP are leading on that. And the course curriculum is aligned with columns A and B of the scope framework and the relevant IAP manual for the modality. And we're really hoping that the pilot will be a success, and all the signs are good at the moment. The courses are currently in year 2. And the data so far confirms that the majority of the students on these pathways, they're saying that they would not have been able to access the profession without this opportunity. So we're really hoping that the pilot continues beyond the pilot and becomes a permanent offering. Now, Jeremy mentioned the work that we've been doing with the Coalition for Inclusive and Anti-Oppressive Practice. So we've been an active member of that coalition from its inception. And the goals of the coalition are to improve diversity in the counselling and psychotherapy professions. And as Jeremy says, we've so far produced the Race is Complicated toolkit, and we're going to be looking further at other resources on different aspects of EDI in the future. One of the pieces of work, and I realise this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, we've been doing some work around reducing the barriers to accreditation. So in 2021, we undertook a survey with our registered members to better understand what they feel the barriers are to them applying for and achieving accreditation, if that's what they'd like to do. So that survey highlighted a number of key areas, which helped us to understand how we could improve and increase accessibility. And some of the things that we've done around that so far is We've introduced a new financial support mechanism for members who are financially disadvantaged to help them apply for accreditation. So there's a kind of fee structure that's linked to membership sliding scale financial support that some members may get if they're financially disadvantaged. And that's been really popular. We've brought in an accreditation support and inclusion officer, Liz Gascoigne, and this has been really successful. Liz provides additional support to members with particular needs, and that was originally a 2-year pilot, so we could assess the need and the uptake from members, but it's been so positively received that this is now going to be a permanent offering for our members. And we've also, well, we ran a pilot, and again, this is now a permanent offering. It's a kind of Viva style audio application for accreditation. And this is for members who struggle for different reasons with preparing written work. And that's had a reasonable uptake. I mean, yeah, so we're continuing with that. So we've run the barriers to accreditation survey again just recently to help inform any future work that we might do to continue to improve accessibility into accreditation. So I think we're on to the next slide now. Jeremy, please. Thank you. So thinking about the future, I mentioned the EDI review of the course and service accreditation schemes. So we're hoping to complete that later this year or early next year, fingers crossed, so we can launch the new EDI criteria for both of those schemes next year. We're also currently developing new routes to accreditation in readiness for scoped integration, which is happening in early 2026. And this is a really important piece of work because these new routes will take account of the knowledge, experience and skills that members have developed over time. We understand that not all members want to or have the means to go and do further training that is aligned with the entry standards for particularly column C in the scope framework. So we really value all that kind of knowledge and experience that our members do acquire over time. So we're developing a kind of a mechanism by which members will be able to evidence an equivalence through those new schemes. So, for example, for somebody wanting to move into our new column C aligned senior membership category, there'll be a mechanism that will be equivalent, considered equivalent to level 7, without them having to undertake further training. So another area that we're thinking about, and we'd love your views on and suggestions about this, because we've had a few conversations recently with different partners and groups asking how we might address some of the barriers that therapists who've qualified outside of the UK, the barriers that they face entering the profession when they come to this country, particularly as a refugee. So the issues around this are quite complex. So, for example, the individual might not have evidence of their original qualifications, or perhaps the training provider doesn't exist anymore. So proving that they meet our membership entry requirements can be problematic. Or the training might not meet our standards, even though on paper it might appear to be a counselling or psychotherapy qualification. So, for example, in some countries, what we call a counselling or psychotherapy qualification, it doesn't always translate. So it might not include supervised placement hours, and there's one that we looked at recently, which was actually more akin to a psychology degree. And even if the individual has the required training and evidence, there can still be issues with undertaking our certificate of proficiency to become a registered member. And that's not just because of any potential language barriers. It might be because they're not yet familiar with UK legislation, different policies, procedures and systems that we kind of take for granted, really, that are needed to practice safely and ethically in the UK. And that's the case even if they only want to work with members of their own country of origin. they'd still need to pass that certificate of proficiency and to have competence to work within the UK context and familiarity with our ethical framework to actually be on our register. So we've had several conversations already, and we're still very open to exploring how we, along with interested external stakeholders, such as services and training providers, how we can work together to look at a possible mechanism that will enable these therapists to either upskill or become familiar with the UK context, perhaps by some form of kind of top-up training or something, so that they can become eligible to become registered, get their insurance and work safely and ethically over here. I'm going to hand over to Jeremy now.
Thanks, Caroline. Really mindful of time. I've got a couple of sort of projects that I've got in the pipeline that relate to our EDI strategy as well. I just wanted to very briefly mention we've convened a third sector expert reference group of CEOs and clinical leads from counselling services. To my great shame, it's England only at this stage, but a lot of it came about because of conversations with organisations about their interactions with NHS, specifically NHS England services. So apologies for anybody on the call from any of the other 4 nations. We are mindful of the need to kind of replicate and make sure that we we work with services right across the board. But the reason I've mentioned this case study project is that we are hearing from organisational members up and down the country about increased demand for their services, increased complexity of client issues. We know that the cost of living crisis has had an enormous impact on services, on clients and on communities. But a theme that we're hearing and that we're going to explore further is the enormous rise in referrals to community-based VCSE, third sector counselling services from NHS sources, but without the funding to meet that. And this is a particular issue for services that are specialising in working with clients from marginalised and racialised community backgrounds. Quite often they're seen as the go-to, and that's in some ways a good thing, but there's an enormous pressure being placed on those. So we are actually in the process of commissioning an organisation to work with some of our organisational members who completed our survey last year and have expressed interest in being involved. And our hope is that we will have a policy report ready ahead of the next election to support some of our work on lobbying and some of our election campaigning work. And the final thing really I wanted to mention, I mentioned earlier on the third sector grant scheme, the pilot, which we funded 2 projects. We had that externally evaluated. We had some recommendations around that. Some of it was around how we do things. So we're looking at developing the second phase of the grant scheme now to launch over the summer. And we'll be looking at maybe trying to simplify the application process. But the messages that we got through from the evaluation was that for counselling services working in partnership with community-based organisations with insights and knowledge and connections into the communities that they were trying to reach, there was real benefit in doing co-production and working with them to remove those barriers. And there was also something in there about those services saying that they really wanted to have therapists that actually either looked more like or had shared identity or shared understanding, shared culture of the clients and the people that they wanted to reach. So that was kind of in the feedback loop. So we're looking at maybe doing a choice of grants rather than having a set scheme, doing some light touch small grants and then a bit more detail for larger grants. So that's kind of where we're up to. There's an update in therapy today. I think our colleague Marjana Hunter might actually be on this call today. I can't see everybody, but if she's here, shout out to Marjana. And she's written a piece that's in the May edition of Therapy Today, and we will continue to communicate as much as we can. As I said at the start, we're nowhere near a destination. This is not a destination thing. This is about doing the work as an organisation, doing the work within our teams, and doing the work personally around making the changes that need to be made and listening. And that's why today's been so good. We want to hear from you, and we welcome your comments, suggestions, ideas. If you've got anything that's going on in your areas that you think we should know about, we'd be really pleased to hear that. So thank you.
Oh, that's really, really informative and brilliant. Bryony, Jeremy and Caroline, thank you so much. Can everyone hear us all right? I'm always, yeah, we're good. Brilliant. Yeah, so I think now is the time to open up the chat. If anyone's got any questions, to pop them in there. And so we can keep an eye. Obviously, we're all limited in time, so we might not be able to get to everyone's, but hopefully we'll be able to get some stuff.
So people can either put in comments in the or questions in the chat, or you can raise a hand.
Raise a hand.
Can I just, Emily, do you mind if I just kick off with one?
You go ahead, yeah.
Trying to ask. I'm just very aware that I often find that as a trainer that students come to me, or people come to me and say that, as you're saying about from marginalized communities, saying that the experience on training courses has been a really negative one. Feeling like they don't have a voice, feeling like they sometimes drop out, they're not supported. Often the trainers don't support them as well. Often, you know, I've heard students say that it's the trainers that are as bad as the other students sometimes. And, you know, I know you've covered this, but I'd just like to hear a little bit more about what BACP can do to really try and support those students so that people really do feel, I know you mentioned the mentoring, but is there more that we can be doing to really try and support students in that way?
Can I just jump in first, Jeremy? I imagine you've got something you want to say about that. But with the coalition that I mentioned before, very early on, we had, I can see Myra's here. Hi, Myra. So we had an event, didn't we, Myra, with training providers, trainers, and to have these conversations about what gets in the way of being able to really embed EDI into all aspects of the training. And I'd previously had lots of conversations with different students who said this very thing that you're talking about, Mick. And it's really very sad to hear. And what we heard from the trainers at this event is that what they seem to be saying that commonly gets in the way is fear. Fear of having these open conversations in the student group, fear of getting it wrong. And that actually ends up not, you know, that there isn't a safe space in order to have those very conversations that enables people to feel safe and included. So, I mean, Myra, I mean, I don't know if you want to say any more about that. But I know Jeremy will probably want to say a bit more about the mentoring and how that's helped.
No, I was just really thinking when Mick was asking this question about what more can be done. I think the toolkit, the Race is Complicated toolkit, I really urge people to have a look at that. It is, as I say, it's aimed at training providers, and it's also, it looks at the messages and the themes that are in it are sort of for institutions, for sort of the course overview, but also for course tutors within that. And it's really unpacking some of the issues around anti-competition. And I know we did our launch event in November, and we had Myra and another member of our EDI Task and Finish group, Jessie Emilian, that came and delivered workshops around that. There is a plan to hold a follow-up on the toolkit. So on the 27th of June, we're in conversations with the other members of the coalition now about holding an online event on the 27th of June, because we want to try and get some feedback on how the toolkit has been used and the kind of impact that it's had so far.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm just wondering if we can go to Narissa Osborne. She's had her hand up for quite some time. I want to know that we've got a lot to get through. So Narissa, you're okay? What's happened for you?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask a question. Well, first of all, thank you for, you know, all the work that's been done around EDI. I think it's brilliant, and the emphasis that you're giving to specific areas. But what I wanted to ask is, in terms of the BACP, what can you do to kind of open up some of the specific areas that's already covered in terms of the services? So, for instance, when we look at Black maternal health care, and Black women actually dying at an alarming rate, and the government, you know, report that's come out last year in regards to that. So I would like to know, can the BACP kind of open that up and kind of provide the outlet for people, for Black women specifically, to have access to services. One of the key things in the report was the disability that's actually caused by Black maternal health negligence, and the complex needs that arises from when mothers don't die, when they actually survive. And it will just be really interesting if the BACP can actually include that, because that's another intersection that's often lost. It's kind of separated, but there is an alarming rate of mothers out there that these things happen to, but it's just been completely blacked out.
Naricia, thank you very much for that comment. I think what you're describing there is very strongly a policy issue and an issue of raising that concern and lobbying. And I think that within our policy and campaigning work, we need to be aware of that. So I'm not aware of any work that we've done specifically on that, but we'd be very happy to have a conversation with you in relation to our policy work in that area, if that is of interest.
Yeah, I think as well, I think in relation to the first question and this one as well, I guess this is partly the point of our EDI review of our course and service accreditation schemes, about how we can embed the aims of the strategy throughout those schemes to enable people to not just access the profession better, but also services as well. So it's really asking courses and services to really think about EDI and every layer of the training and or the service. And of course that then becomes a kind of model for best practice, which we hope then services that for whatever reason, or courses that are not accredited, that they kind of use that as a model for best practice, and that the kind of influence filters down in that way.
Yeah, I think it would be good to see what challenges the policy sees in kind of making these services more accessible for particular marginalized groups, because it does exist for, say, disabled. As I said, there is an intersection there. So it will be interesting to see what would prohibit policy-wise from that being included. So for instance, Headstrong, which is and I'm part of Headstrong, they've just launched an initiative at the moment specifically for Black women, keep Black women safe. So it'd just be interesting to see, as as the BACP, what that would look like, what your policy would say to stop that.
Thank you, Narissa.
Yeah, and I'm just conscious of time. I know we haven't really got much time left, and there's a couple of questions in the chat. One of them is about being physical, so that like the physical element of like looking into organizations. I think it's Jane who's asked what work is being done to make training and placements physically accessible for disabled people. So kind of,
well,
I'm not directing a question at you, like I'm not expecting a full-on answer, but it's such a huge scope, isn't there? Like there's just so much to consider.
Well, this is it. And of course, our courses and services that are accredited by us, of course, we have jurisdiction, and we can really, through the criteria, ensure that those courses and services are doing everything they can to increase accessibility. But outside of our accreditation schemes, we've got very little kind of jurisdiction. It's the work of colleagues like Jeremy and the policy team that are going out there and kind of talking to people to influence.
And I notice we have Dr. Dwight Turner is here, and he has his hand politely raised there.
I didn't realise Dwight was here until the PowerPoint disappeared. Hi, Dwight.
Hi, good evening to you all. Hi, Carol. It's good to see you all again. I'm basically just following on from sort of mixed point there, and I think he's making a good point around. We're talking a lot about how to bring in other communities into the profession. I'm part of one of the issues that often I get students commenting on, like a bit like mixing the way, is what support is there for trainers along the way to because there's a transition point for them as well. This is a learning curve for so many people who've been in the profession for a long time, who've been trainers for a long time as well, and have a lot to offer. And I guess it's another part of this whole framework, if you like, as to how that then translates to supporting trainers on different theoretical perspectives to move forward.
Well, I guess the Race is Complicated toolkit was a kind of starting point, that the work that we did with the coalition, and then as Jeremy just mentioned, that it was a kind of train the trainer style kind of events that Maya and Jesse led on back in November last year, and we've made that available to everybody. It's available publicly. It's not just for BACP members, because it's really important to us that anybody involved in training has access to those resources. So that's a kind of start, really, and we want to do more of that work about supporting not just our members but the wider profession in building kind of not just knowledge and understanding but confidence to bring these issues in. As I say, fear is a big factor that gets in the way. You know, people are frightened of getting it wrong. So building confidence in trainers, I think, is really, really important. But I get your point, Dwight. It's about bringing other communities, not just into the profession, but into teaching as well.
Yeah, and just to say too, Dwight, I think that the reason that the coalition have put in this follow-up event for the 27th of June is that the production and the launch of the toolkit, a bit like, hopefully like our strategy, it's not an end. It's not as Bryony said, it's not something that goes. So we want that feedback and that loop, and continuing to, continue to push it and generate some of the conversations that these toolkits and that these sort of resources can generate to keep that moving forward. So yeah, but I hear what you're saying, and I think that's really important.
No, thank you for that. Much appreciated.
And again, thanks, Dwight. That's lovely. And I know we're moving on through time, and I just want to pick another one up from the chat. We'll have Morwena. I'm not sure whether you want to come on and say more about what you've asked. It's something that was raised within the presentation. Are you there, Morwena? It's all right if you don't want to. I can absolutely read it out.
Yeah, I am.
Oh, you there?
I've seen the question. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of my big concerns is that a lot of training courses are at HND or level 4, and that many people, that's all they can afford, and they make incredibly good counselors, and they're also often, from marginalized communities, but with Scope Ed, that seems to be out of the question then of them being able to get very far at all. And that's because it's a university entrance thing for as far as I can understand it.
Yeah, Morwena, just to come back on that, because we are, as I say, developing new routes and pathways to accreditation. So it's really important, because I know the Scope framework sets out these typical kind of entry points for the different columns. And I absolutely agree with you. There's some amazing counsellors and therapists out there who did their level 4, level 5 diploma. And it's absolutely right that, they acquire all this knowledge and expertise over time, but they shouldn't have to go right back to the beginning. I mean, because typically, I know people who've done those trainings and then thought, oh, I want to be a psychotherapist, and they've had to start right back at the beginning of their training in a student group with people who've never worked in a helping capacity at all. And that's not right. There needs to be a way to acknowledge that experience that's been acquired, as I say. So that's why we're looking at these new routes and pathways, so people don't actually have to go back and do more training and get a level 7. It's so they can actually progress through the Scope columns and the membership categories. So there will be a mechanism for applying that is deemed equivalent, so that people don't have to go back and do more training.
I mean,
So I hope that answers the question.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, I have various disabilities, and I've been actually a qualified counsellor now since '98, and I'm going to lose my senior accreditation, and because I don't have a degree, and I mean, I'm an accredited supervisor, and that was about the hardest thing I ever did, and I don't think many people have been going ahead for that. But it's these mechanisms that, you know, that for me it causes me a lot of anxiety, because I'm going to lose work if I lose my senior accreditation.
Yeah.
It's all of those kind of things. So I'm actually more interested in the entrance qualifications for people who are coming up behind me. But I am also concerned for myself.
And that's a really good point, and I'm so grateful for you, Morena, for offering that up today. And I'm sorry to cut anybody off, and I'm sorry we didn't get around to everyone. It's time to wrap up now. Unfortunately, we're after 6. I'm getting wrong for my timekeeping. But everybody is welcome to stay around for half an hour afterwards. We'll be here until 6:30, discussing this or anything task related. So if anybody does want to stay around, time to say goodbye, everyone. From now, we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you again, Carolyn, Jeremy, Bryony. It's been lovely to share Friday tea time with you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
Thank
really
you,
good.
everybody.
And we welcome further feedback. Thanks.
That's lovely. Thanks. So people want to hang on. We'll be back
Bye.
in 5 minutes with a quick break. But thank you so much, colleagues from BACP and everybody for joining us.